Hello, students. Now we are going to talk about making peace after World War One. So first, I want to put you in the state of mind of the world at this time. It's 1918. War has been raging since 1914. Millions of people are dead. Millions dead. Houses are destroyed. Entire cities are destroyed. The whole world is depressed. Think of the most sad, miserable, depressed state you've ever been in. Now make that the whole world. Then, on top of that, add that in 1918, there was a pandemic. Just like we are having a pandemic now, there was a pandemic in 1918, and 20 million people died. It was awful. So there had been this war for 4 years. Everybody's dying everywhere. Soldiers are maimed, like soldiers walking around with only one arm everywhere. It was awful. And then on top of that, there was a pandemic. This was a rough, rough time for the world. So the Allies, all the people of the Ally states, the politicians and just the normal citizens, everybody blamed the Central Powers. They blamed the Central Powers. They said it's all their fault. And the Central Powers, of course, weren't too happy about that because they were like, hey, this war isn't our fault. And the Allies, people from the Ally countries, wanted the Central Powers to pay, like actual real money, wanted them to pay. To like France thought Germany and Austro-Hungary and the Ottoman Empire, the old Ottoman Empire, it's fallen now, thought those places should have to pay to fix everything in France and Great Britain. It was, Germany wasn't exactly happy about that. Also, the Allies were claiming they had won. They're like, we won the war, yay! But the Central Powers, they were really upset about that because in their opinion, they hadn't lost the war. They didn't think the war was over. They just thought their armistice, they just thought that was a ceasefire. We're going to agree to not shoot you guys anymore, but this thing isn't over. So that's what the Central Powers thought. But thank you. That's what the Central Powers thought. But the Allies were like, no, we won the war. It's over. You guys have to pay. There was also, at this time, it was all kinds of unrest in the colonies. Because you remember, the European countries had sent their subjects, the people from their colonies, they had made them go fight. And like these poor Africans from West Africa had now been fighting a war in Europe, and they went back completely embittered, disillusioned with Europe. And they're like, man, that place sucks. I don't want to be any part of Europe. So there was all kinds of unrest in the colonies. People wanted independence. There were political radicals. Radicals are people that want people that want great, huge change, like great, massive change in the way the government works. So these are political radicals. There are all kinds of radicals. Political radicals wanted great, massive, huge, let's just shake up everything and change how our government works. And then the conservatives were saying, we don't want any of that. Just let's go back to how things were. Everything was fine. Let's just forget this war ever happened and go back to how things were. But the radicals were pushing for massive change. And something that was happening in Russia right now was Bolshevism, which you may know as communism. But at this time, it was called Bolshevism. People were Bolsheviks. Bolsheviks. And later on, the Bolshevik movement began being called communism. And the conservatives were all freaked out about Bolshevism. They did not like it at all. So there were these political radicals pushing for huge, massive change in the government. And the conservatives were all freaked out about it. And what was really freaking them out was Bolshevism that was going on in Russia. So we come to the Paris Peace Conference. The Paris Peace Conference. Let me erase that where I made a mistake. Okay. The Allies got together to discuss the future of Europe. The Allies, everyone that had fought on the Ally side, got together to discuss the future of Europe. Except, so they didn't invite Germany. Actually, they didn't invite any of the Central Powers. And they didn't invite, I didn't spell that correctly, whatever. They didn't invite Russia. What? Russia was one of the main ally powers. And here they are having a meeting in Paris to discuss future peace, and they didn't invite Russia. Why not? Why didn't they invite Russia? Because they didn't like the new Russian government. Remember I said in the last lecture, the Russian government had collapsed. The Tsar's family was gone. New guy, Lenin, is in charge now. And he got to his powerful position because he promised the Russians he would take them out of the war. Well, so now everybody's gotten together to sit and chat about what are we going to do in the future so this never happens again. Let's make peace. But they didn't invite Russia because they didn't like Lenin. But who was there was the United States. And that's kind of silly because the United States barely did anything in World War I. The war was almost over when the US was like, oh yeah, we're coming to help, we're coming to help. And it is, I mean, it did help, it did. Probably if the US had not joined, the Central Powers would have won because everyone was so tired of this war. Nobody wanted to be there. Nobody wanted to be fighting. And Germany did this one last rush to go in and destroy France. And they probably would have if the US hadn't come to the rescue. So the US, I'm not trying to belittle their part in World War I. They did. They sent soldiers. It made everybody excited again to fight, and they won. But Russia fought a whole lot more in the war for the Allies than the US did. But the US was part of the Paris Peace Conference, and Russia wasn't, because the Allied powers didn't like Lenin. Russia wasn't very happy about this. So at the Paris Peace Conference, there were like more than 30 countries participated in it. A lot of countries participated in the Paris Peace Conference, but there were 3 groups called the Big Three that kind of dominated the meeting. And those were the US, Great Britain, and France. The US was, hopefully you guys know now, at the time, the president was Woodrow Wilson. And Great Britain, the guy that represented Great Britain at the Paris Peace Conference was David Lloyd George, George. And France was represented by Georges Simicro. And they wanted 3 completely different things. Woodrow Wilson was pushing his 14 points. David Lloyd George, all this guy really cared about was making Great Britain awesome. And all George Simicro really cared about was making Germany weak. Because, you know, France was still bitter over the Franco-Prussian War. They were mad about that. And now they're mad about World War I. They don't ever want that to happen again. So at this meeting, there was lots and lots of bickering between all these other countries. Like Italy kept insisting that their secret agreement with the Allies to get land from Austria, they kept insisting that must be honored. All these other little countries wanted to make their own countries, because don't forget, the Austro-Hungarian Empire had collapsed, and so had the Ottoman Empire had collapsed. And those 2 empires controlled a bunch of land in Southeastern Europe. Well, now they're gone. So what's going to happen? Everybody was bickering with each other about how they were going to make lines and who was going to get what country and how were they going to name it and where was it going to happen. And Woodrow Wilson ended up losing like 13 of his points, but he would not back down on his idea of having a club of nations where they would sit around and talk about how to not fight. They would intermediate with each other. And that was formed. And it's called the League of Nations. The League of Nations was formed. So now we've got the Treaty of Versailles. Hopefully that Versailles rings a bell for you. This was the same Versailles that Louis and Marie Antoinette lived at. And they had their fancy parties while the people were hungry. And then the Women's March came and they were saying, bread, 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 bread. And they drug Louis and his whole family back to Paris and imprisoned them in their palace. That Versailles, the same Versailles. This is the Treaty of Versailles. It was in June 1919. And the Allies ordered the Germans to come and sign this thing. And don't forget, the Empire of Germany had collapsed, and now it's a new republic. We've got the new Republic of Germany. Germany was going through all kinds of turmoil right now. I mean, we had just ended a war, so everything was destroyed. I mean, think of what if you had, I don't know, there's some war here and bombs are dropped all over the city of Almaty, and you're driving through in your car and buildings are just destroyed. Well, that's what all of Germany looked like. Times were rough for them. And now these European allies demanded that representatives of Germany show up at Versailles and sign this treaty. Well, it was pretty rough for Germany. It said Germany must accept full blame for the war. Everything is Germany's fault. Everything was Germany's fault. It also said they must pay huge reparations. Reparations are pay to repair damages in a war. So like all the buildings that were destroyed in France, all the buildings destroyed in Belgium, all the buildings destroyed in Italy, all the buildings destroyed in Great Britain. Germany has to pay to rebuild those buildings. Also, they had to pay pensions for Allied soldiers or their widows and families. What's a pension? A pension is like your retirement. So Germany has to pay a salary, like a paycheck. Germany has to give a paycheck to any Allied soldier that is still alive for the rest of his life. Like a monthly pay for the rest of his life to all Allied soldiers. And if the soldier himself died in the war, Germany has to support the widow, the dead soldier's wife that's still living. Germany has to pay that widow and her children for the rest of their lives. It also limited the size. It limited the size of the German military, made absolute rules of like, you're only allowed to have this many soldiers. You're only allowed to have this many tanks. You're only allowed to have this many airplanes, and so on and so on and so forth. Guns and everything was completely limited. They also took away land from Germany, like from the German borders, took away land. Where do you think some of that land went? You're right, back to France. That land that France has been mad about for so long, they took it back. They also lost some land on the east, but they lost a bunch of land. And 100% of all their overseas colonies, all gone. that took them away. The Allied powers split up German colonies and took them for themselves. So this Treaty of Versailles was so bad for Germany. Germany was already poor. It was like Germany, due to this war, like everything was destroyed. Millions were dead. Wives were left without their husbands, children without their fathers, houses destroyed, businesses destroyed. All of Germany is a war zone. It's a wreck. They're broke. And now they're being told that they have to take full responsibility to the war. They have to say, yes, everything was our fault. They have to pay reparations. That's paying to fix all the buildings. And they have to give pensions to all the Allied soldiers or their families. And they lost their colonies. And their military is limited. This was really, really, really rough for Germany. It was bad. And well, as you can imagine, Germany was angry. They were angry. And for the next 20 years, tensions between Germany and all the other countries were really rough. Think about when you've had a big, big fight with someone and you haven't actually made up with them. You guys just kind of like didn't really talk about it again. And so you're still feeling tense around that person. That's what it was like for 20 years. Now, let's talk about self-determination. Self-determination. Remember, that was one of the 14 points. So this was kind of okay with other people, but a lot of countries agreed. It wasn't just Woodrow Wilson. Self-determination was saying that all these Eastern European countries, they were going to get to make their own rules. So Poland, the country of Poland, was created because you used to just have Germany, Russia. Sorry, that's an R, Russia. Now it looks more like this. I don't know if I can really do this. Now you've got Poland, Germany, Russia. They're here. We got Poland. I have a map that I'm going to show you in a minute, but I want to make sure you understand it all. The Baltics, which are Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, these countries were all created. They came out of Russia. They were, if this is Russia, they were part of Russia up here. Brand new countries. These countries had never existed before. Then in the Balkans, this is southeastern Europe, everywhere where there was the Habsburgs. The Habsburgs were the family of the emperor of the Austria-Hungarian Empire. Well, the Austro-Hungarian Empire completely collapsed. And here we got the country of Austria, the country of Hungary, and the country of Czechoslovakia. Then, do you remember how the Serbs so desperately wanted their South Slav state? They wanted to join the Slavic people of southern southeastern Europe and make one Slavic state. Well, they got it. They got Yugoslavia. This was the South Slavic state. And it was dominated by the Serbs. All right, now I have a little video to show you. Oh, where is it? Okay, I'm gonna show you this little video. There's no sound, but I'm gonna back up a little bit. Okay, this video is gonna show you how the borders changed. The blue is before World War I. See, there's Poland, Czechoslovakia, Austria, Hungary, Yugoslavia. And then also when the Ottoman Empire collapsed, Turkey was created. And Germany became, the German Empire became Germany and lost land. And then also Italy got that tiny little bit of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. All right. Okay, just a tiny little bit more. At this time, the colonies were really excited about the Treaty of Versailles. They were excited about that because they saw all these new countries getting created, and they got their own freedoms and self-determination. They thought it was awesome. But the European countries didn't let their colonies free. They kept colonies, and what they did was they made colonies mandates. Mandate. So they didn't call it a colony anymore. They called it a mandate. And the mandate was supposed to be led by the European country only until they were strong enough and independent enough to lead themselves. And then they were supposed to be just let go to be an independent nation. But it didn't work that way. They just stayed just like colonies. But they didn't call them colonies anymore. They called them mandates. And the people the citizens of the colonies, they felt completely betrayed. They were really, really upset about all of this. They wanted their freedom. And then I already mentioned this, but the League of Nations, was created. So that was Woodrow Wilson, the United States president. This was his big dream. This was his point of his 14 points that he simply would not let go. They must do, I keep putting an extra U in there. They must do a League of Nations so everyone can sit around and talk about things before a war happens again. This was his big, big, big thing. But how do you like this? When Woodrow Wilson got back to the United States, a bunch of the conservative senators didn't want to do it. They didn't want to have anything to do with the League of Nations. Remember, conservatives don't really like change much. They don't want to progress and go forward. They want to stay right where they are. Sometimes they even want to go back, but they're very, very selective about the new things they do. And the conservative senators didn't want to do it. Now, do you remember when we talked about during the election, and I talked to you about how the American government works, and there's checks and balances. There's the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch, and they all have to approve of each other. No one branch can make a decision without the others approving. Well, this League of Nations, Woodrow Wilson's big thing that he pushed for and he wanted so badly, and the countries finally did it, the legislative branch refused to approve of it. And so the United States didn't join. Imagine how upset Woodrow Wilson must have been in his own people when it was his thing that he was pushing for and he wanted so badly and he thought would help the world. The conservative senators refused to approve of it. And so the United States of America did not join the League of Nations. Okay, that's it.